What are the polls telling us directionally about the race?
I understand there's a difference, though, with the New York Times Sienna Poll, and you know this. It's given disproportionate impact. This year, this cycle, it is skewed wildly in Donald Trump's direction. Hold on. And the New York Times feasts on it with clickbait stories like a dozen at a time.
MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, who once identified as a Republican, is big mad over the fact that his preferred presidential candidate, Joe Biden, appears to be a loser in the election polling. Now, we've been talking about election polling endlessly on this show because the polling does not look good for Biden. And when you look at swing states in particular, which essentially decide the election, in poll after poll, Biden has been struggling. Now, the latest poll is the New York Times Sienna College poll that was released earlier this week. That's the one that has really upset Joe Scarborough. And so instead of considering the possibility that Biden is in fact a weak and vulnerable candidate, even against someone as divisive as Donald Trump, he'd rather be in denial and attack the New York Times instead. Let's watch.
The New York Times right now is actively shaping the election cycles where this poll comes out on a Sunday and on Monday people go, oh, and I heard it. And I'm sitting there going, oh, don't be so stupid. That's why we're doing this.
So
hold on a second. Hold on. What I hear is after these Sienna polls come out, every time New York Times poll says, oh, well, everything that Joe Biden's done since the State of the Union address, all this money that he's put out, all of the campaigning is for naught. No, it's not. No, it's not. There's one poll that's wildly skewed every time. And it does shape, if it's a New York Times poll versus a Morning Consult poll, and the New York Times then amplifies it 15, 16, 17 times, it warps reality.
So the reason why Joe Scarborough is so upset about all of this is because the New York Times Sienna College poll does tend to have the worst results for Joe Biden. It's not the only poll that has the worst results for Joe Biden, but it does tend to be an outlier in that the results, especially in the swing states, tend to show that Trump has a far bigger lead over Biden than other polls do. Other polls also show that Trump has a wide lead over Biden. It's just not as wide as the New York Times Sienna College poll. Now I'm gonna show you the average of polling in just a moment so you can see that Joe Scarborough is 100% in denial. Now let's take a look at what the the results are, right? So this is the New York Times Sienna College poll that was released earlier this week. And when you look at how Biden is performing against Donald Trump in the swing states, he ain't doing so well. So the poll shows Trump beating Biden in every battleground state except for Wisconsin, where Biden leads 47-45, but the result is within the margin of error. The biggest gap is in Nevada, where Trump leads 50-38. That is a massive lead. And it goes beyond the margin of error, obviously. Trump leads Arizona 49 to Biden's 42. Trump also leads in Michigan 49-42. And then you have Georgia where Trump leads again by 10 points, 49-39. Now, the swing states, as we all know, matter. They matter the most. The swing states end up deciding the election. And the swing states are more important, or the polling of the swing states, in my opinion, are more important than what the national polls say. Because remember, the election is decided by the Electoral College. It's not decided by popular vote. And so the national polls, sure, it's a good metric to look at to see how your preferred candidate is doing. But if you really want to get into the nitty gritty, you want to look at how your preferred candidate is performing specifically in these swing states. But that doesn't stop Scarborough from using national polling to make it seem like Biden is absolutely killing it.
At the same, put this New York Times Ipsos poll.
The Ipsos.
Put it back. Run at the same time by the New York Times. Biden's ahead by 4 points nationally. 4 points nationally. Not even an article about it.
Pausing here to deliver some honest truth as we do in our news coverage as well. TYT is facing challenges, guys, as the entire industry is. You know who could make the difference? You. If you hit the join button below, it's gonna make all the difference and keep us in business. We appreciate you, thank you.
Yeah, hey, genius. There's no article about it, or maybe there isn't as much attention paid to that national poll because again, the swing states matter more, right? You wanna look at who is likely to win the electoral votes necessary to claim victory. Now, look, I want to also be fair to Joe Scarborough because there has been quite a bit of criticism in regard to the methodology used in the New York Times Sienna College poll. I want to be absolutely clear, I am not a polling expert, so I feel super uncomfortable weighing in on whether or not the methodology is sound. But here is what the Times shared about how they conducted the poll, just in full transparency. I want to disclose that to you all. Our polls are conducted by telephone using live interviewers in both English and Spanish. Nearly 95% of respondents were contacted on a cell phone for this poll. So they're reaching out to people on cell phones, not on landlines. Voters are selected for the survey from a list of registered voters. The list contains information on the demographic characteristics of every registered voter, allowing us to make sure we reach the right number of voters for each party, race, and region. They also say that each state poll, and this is important because it has to do with the margin of error. Each state poll has a margin of error ranging from plus or minus 3.6 points in Pennsylvania to plus or minus 4.6 points in Georgia. In theory, this means that the results should reflect the views of the overall population most of the time, though many other challenges create additional sources of error. And I checked to see whether, Trump is within the margin of error in the swing states where he is leading Biden, and he is not within the margin of error. So it's, again, not really looking good for Biden if you're just focusing on this polling. But I think it would be a mistake to just focus on one or two polls. I think the right thing to do to get a better read on how your preferred candidate is performing is to take a look at the average of polls. And that is what I would like to do right now. In fact, I'll do that in a minute. I do want to also just go to one more clip from this exchange on MSNBC where a gentleman named John Heilemann was luckily on the set to gently push back on Joe Scarborough because he got a little bit conspiratorial in regard to the New York Times Sienna College poll. It seems like he was trying to accuse them of putting their thumb on the scale and essentially swaying hearts and minds through this outlier polling. So here's what Heilemann had to say about that.
I'm not going to carry water for the New York Times or for the methodology of this poll. I'll keep going back to a thing that I try to say every time we talk about these things, which is that I'm really interested, and I know you know this, is like, what are the polls telling us directionally about the race?
I understand there's a difference though with the New York Times Sienna poll, and you know this.
All I'd say about this is that I agree with you that the problem to me, unless you want to suggest you think there's a conspiracy at the Times about this, which
their methodology is bizarre.
Well, but you're talking about
Larry Sabato said this.
Right.
Walston said this.
Joe, you're saying something more than that, though. You're saying the New York Times is systematically putting these polls out in a way to try to amplify them to drive the news cycle.
Yes.
I am
saying that.
And I'm saying I'd like to know. I'm curious. As someone who I understands your level of sophistication about reading the media, why you think that's true. What I'm trying to say is, I agree with you. The best bulwark against any polls, outliers, or anything else for people who are actually consumers of this information is to not let any given news outlet or any given poll shape your perception of the race unduly.
But John, that's not realistic.
Okay, all right. God, I have so many things to say about that clip we just watched. So look, I love how Joe Scarborough was like, the methodology is bizarre, according to other Biden supporters in the media. Okay, can you explain to us why you feel that the methodology is bizarre? Like, at least spend a little bit of time getting into the details as to why the methodology is not sound. Also, people do not change their voting behavior based on polls. I mean, there might be a handful of people who do that, but overall, people vote based on incentives and disincentives, right? And so I'm not gonna vote for a different candidate because I see a New York Times Sienna College poll saying that Biden is gonna lose. I vote based on taking a look at my life, taking a look at the two candidates, and asking myself which of these two candidates would be best for improving my life and the lives of others in this country. Okay, I would think about what issues matter the most to me. This is how Americans operate, okay? The idea that they're gonna be swayed by the New York Times putting their thumb on the scale through a method, a study that doesn't have sound methodology is ridiculous to me. But we've had 4 years of Biden. We have had 4 straight years of President Joe Biden. It's amazing to me because even when it comes to the national polling that Joe Scarborough was trying to emphasize and amplify, you have Biden leading by 3 points when he's running against a man who's facing 4 separate indictments, a man who's considered a threat to democracy, a man that Democrats have been fear-mongering about from day one. You're having a tough time beating that guy. Maybe take a minute to ask yourself why. Why is that? Could it be that there are flaws in the campaign? Could it be that Biden is not a candidate favored by some usual Democratic voters because he made all sorts of promises he didn't keep in the 4 years that he has served as president? So departments within his administration have done some good work. We've covered those stories, okay? One of the more recent ones that we covered had to do with the Transportation Department ensuring that Americans get automatic refunds when their flights are severely delayed or when their bags are lost by the airline companies. That is a good thing. But those are small things in the grand scheme of things, okay? When you take a look at how Americans are feeling about their economic situation. And when they maybe reflect on some of the things that Biden promised when he was running the first time around, like a Voting Rights Act. Did he accomplish that? Did he even fight for that? No. Paid family leave? No. Public option? He ran on that during his first campaign? No. Consequences for Mohammed bin Salman after he ordered the assassination, the execution and dismemberment of a Washington Post journalist and US resident. He said he was gonna do something about that. Did he? No. I mean, it goes on and on. Endless military funding for foreign wars? Yes. So when it comes to the resources necessary to deliver on policies that Biden promised, oh, we don't have those resources, how are we gonna pay for it? We gotta nickel and dime Americans. When it comes to funding foreign wars abroad, Biden will literally circumvent Congress in order to get that funding and that weaponry to other countries. You don't think that upsets Americans? You don't think Americans are paying attention to that? Wondering, hey, why am I dealing with the high cost of living, endless inflation, all of these economic frustrations, high interest rates? Our government's telling us there's nothing they can do about it. And then at the same time, it seems like there's endless resources for wars abroad. These things are gonna hurt him politically. The chickens eventually do come home to roost. And the fact that, Democratic voters and more importantly, members of the liberal media space, like they just refuse to accept it and instead look for excuses or other people to blame. In this case, you have Joe Scarborough blaming the New York Times for the flaws of the Biden administration and the Biden campaign. That's really what's going on here. Okay, now let's take a look at the average of polling. Because the averages matter more than a single poll. If you're looking at a single poll, you will maybe be led astray, okay? Because there could be issues with the methodology of a single poll. But why don't we take a look at the swing states and what the average of polling says? Let's take a look at Wisconsin, where of the swing states, Biden is doing the best and he's still losing by 0.6 points to Donald Trump. Again, this is not based on one poll, this is based on an average of all polls done in the state of Wisconsin. Let's go to the next one. All right, this is Arizona, where based on an average of polls, Trump is leading Biden by 5.2 points. Not good, let's go to the next one, Nevada. This again, based on the average of polls out of the state of Nevada, where Trump is leading 6.2. All right, let's look at the rest. If you look at the average of polls for Georgia, Trump is leading Biden by 4.6 points. You have Michigan, where Trump is leading by 0.8 points, which is actually surprising because Michigan is the state where you have all those uncommitted voters who are really unhappy with what's happening in Gaza. Pennsylvania, Trump is leading by 2.0 points. In North Carolina, Trump is leading by 5.4 points. Again, average of polls. I didn't do the polls. I'm not running for president. I'm not advising Biden on anything. I am just sharing this information with you. That is it. And the polls are supposed to communicate to the candidates that they need to recalibrate, that they need to reconsider how they're running their campaign. Biden is unwilling to do that. Biden wants to play games with his support with Israel, where he claims that he's gonna withhold weapons, and then literally a day later, he approves another $1 billion in military aid to Israel. And he thinks that Democratic voters aren't paying attention to that. They're paying attention to that. He is too old, and look, it's not even about his numerical age. Who cares about that? Because you look at someone like Bernie Sanders, and he's up there in age too. But there's a difference, guys, and we all know it. You could lie to yourself and you can be in denial all you want. There is a difference between how Biden appears when he's out there campaigning. He does appear frail, and Americans see that, and it scares them because it is an important job to be the president, the leader of the United States of America. And yeah, Trump's up there in age as well, but you have to be honest about the fact that he does not look frail. And so Biden promised he wasn't gonna run for a second term, but he's so concerned about his legacy, he doesn't wanna be a one-term president, that he reneged on that and he was insisting to run for a second term. And he also said that he believes he's the only one who can beat Donald Trump. All the other Democrats in the country, all those other Democratic politicians, chop liver. They can't beat Trump. Only Biden can beat Trump. All right, well, I guess we're gonna have to wait and see what happens. By the way, the Real Clear Politics average of the national polling shows that Trump is actually ahead by 1.1 points. So finally, I take you to Biden's favorite news broadcaster, and that's Fareed Zakaria, who had a segment on how Biden's doing. He favors Biden, he's hoping and praying that Biden wins, but he's concerned. Let's watch.
I have to admit, none of this is playing out as I thought it would. Trump is now leading in almost all the swing states, but behind those numbers lie even more troubling details. As someone worried about the prospects of a second Trump term, I think it's best to be honest about reality. I understand that polls are not always accurate, but in general, they have tended to underestimate Donald Trump's support, not overestimate it. I doubt that there are many shy Biden voters in the country.
Reality is reality. You can choose to live in denial, but those who take that option are usually in for a rude awakening. I think it's better to live in reality and see if there's any way to save a sinking ship, but it doesn't seem like Biden's interested in that, and it certainly doesn't help that you have the liberal media providing cover for Biden and allowing him to live in absolute delusion about where both candidates stand in this general election.
Hey, thanks for watching that video. We really appreciate it, guys. And we appreciate it if you become members because that allows us to be independent, honest, progressive, all the things that you don't get from corporate media. And all of that is because of you guys. Hit the join button below and become one of us, become a young Turk.